2018 has been a shit year for many of us. Not to try and add on to a pile of negativity, but it's true, even within the video game industry if you want to talk about workers' rights. However, these past few years have been incredible for video games. From heavy hitters like The Witcher 3 and Uncharted 4, to indie gems like That Dragon, Cancer, and Cuphead, to the niche surprises of Nier Automata and Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice. No matter who you are, you should be able to find 5 games to make a top 5 games list. Which is what I did. These are my top 5 games of 2018. If you don't agree, whatever. Also possible spoilers throughout. Alright, let's go. While the balance of life and death is determined by your hand, there is always a danger of becoming something other than human. I mentioned that Don't Nod's been on the up for the past few years. The first episode of Life is Strange 2 was great, but there's only one episode, so I don't feel comfortable putting it on the list. That's why I put Vampire here instead. Vampire is an action RPG that takes a lot of cues from its sister series, Life is Strange. Or you can say it's heavily influenced by BioWare, like how Telltale's The Walking Dead was. And that influenced Life is Strange. Media genres are quite incestuous. So the game begins like the last 2 Don't Nod games. A confused protagonist stumbling through an unknown location with a lot of information being thrown at them at once. This time you're Dr. Reed waking up in a mass grave. He stumbles through, his vision a blinding red where he can only see the vascular system of living beings. He is embraced by someone before he bites their neck. After feeding, his vision returns to normal and he realizes he has killed his sister, who was searching for him in the grave. That's a strong opening. A few hours later and you're dropped into the thick of it. You are a vampire doctor during the Spanish influenza outbreak in the tail end of World War I, all while navigating the supernatural underworld in the poorer areas of England. Now that's a fucking concept. This game asks the player how much of their humanity they're willing to sacrifice in order to succeed. With each passing day, your enemies get stronger, and if you refuse to feed, you don't. But the game adds another twist. In order to gain more experience from a kill, you have to learn more about them by talking to them. You are forced to form a connection with your victims. And you have to make that choice. Should I make things easier for myself by killing this person I formed a relationship with? Or should I struggle like everyone else? And this game can get real fucking hard if you don't level up. Now Vampire is definitely a B-tier game like a Darksiders or something. The presentation is clunky. While I think Dr. Reed sounds really good, most of the voice acting is mediocre to bad. And the combat is just fine. But do yourself a favor and play this game. There's a strong story here with fantastic characters, great vampire lore and politics. It may not be a Life is Strange, but it's strong in its own right. A complicated soul reaches his story's end. He spent years trying to escape. He succeeds, but it costs him everything. This one's a cheat, but my list, fuck you. The story of Yakuza has always been the story of its main protagonist, Kazuma Kiryu. Even in the games where he had to share the spotlight, they were always about him. Kiryu is a flat character. He doesn't change much throughout the franchise. He is a pinnacle of positive masculinity, and his very presence is impetus for change in those around him. Yakuza 6 The Songs of Life finishes Kiryu's story. It makes sure to bring damn near everyone back to say goodbye. Akiyama, Saejima, the fucking pocket racer guy from Zero and Kiwami, everyone. But Kiryu's most important relationship is his relationship to his adoptive daughter, Haruka. If you've played all the games in release order, you've seen Haruka grow up from a child into a very responsible teenager, to a teen idol, and now a mother. Kiryu is a grandfather. For large sections of Yakuza 6, you are caring for your grandson while investigating the accident that put your daughter into a coma. If Yakuza is the story of Kiryu, then it is also the story of family. At the end of Yakuza 6, when Kiryu is finally reunited with his daughter, he writes a letter to his somewhat adoptive son, Daigo Dojima. While I always got the sense that Dojima held a great sense of admiration for Kiryu, I didn't think that far into it. I never considered him his son. But then I hadn't played Yakuza 2. While Yakuza 6 is about Kiryu's relationship with Haruka, Yakuza 2 and its remake is about his relationship with Dojima. Well, Dojima and Kaoru Sayama. But that's not important. It's good, it just doesn't have its long-lasting effect. But Kiryu mentored this troublemaker kid into the patriarch of the Tojo clan. He's the head of the Yakuza because Kiryu pulled him from the alleyways and the bars of Kamurocho to make sure he made something better of his life. And while Haruka is just as flat a character as Kiryu and Haruka balance each other out so well that when one strays from their path, the other is there to set them right nearly immediately. Dojima changes drastically. He starts off as a punk and ends up like a criminal genius, but not evil? Dojima represents Kiryu's ties to the Yakuza, while Haruka represents his wish to sever those ties. And he realizes that this decade-long push and pull has been hell on his children. Dojima lives in Kiryu's shadow. Kiryu's a legend in the Yakuza, and Haruka is frequently put in danger because of old grudges or people looking to make a name for themselves. Kiryu decides to sacrifice everything so his children can be happy, because that's who Kiryu is. He always does what he thinks is right no matter the cost. And that's why he's one of the greatest video game protagonists in history. The end of the world falls haltingly. making sure it brings individuals to ruin as it eclipses the world in the hollow promise of nothing. Another little treat, this is technically 3 games in one, but Banner Saga 3 came out this year, and that's a third of this package, so I'm counting it. It's similar to how The Return of the King won an Oscar for Best Picture as a celebration of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. If they can do it, why can't I? So a few years ago I tried to play Banner Saga, but it was just too hard. Too many of my characters fainted during combat, so I just kept getting into battles with weak units. Then I just kept redoing battles to get the results I want, but in this game that's way too hard, so I gave up on it. So I decided to jump back in this year because I heard some wild shit happens in the third one and a collection was released, so why not go all in? I'm glad I did. The complete Banner Saga is a continuous story, meant to unfold like a fantasy novel. Each game even holds its own set of chapters. The first Banner Saga is the first 7 chapters, the next one starts at chapter 8, and so on. You can think of this game as a mix between Game of Thrones, Oregon Trail, XCOM, and Mass Effect. All stories with the world, personal or otherwise, teetering on the edge. In Banner Saga, the apocalypse is nearing its end, just waiting for the rest of the world's population to fade away. The gods have all died in war and the sun has stopped in the sky. You play as several factions wandering through these dying lands trying to survive, and you will experience loss. Your choices carry over from game to game, and mistakes I made in the first game came back to me in the third game's final moments. This story isn't about getting a happy ending. The first game makes that abundantly clear as the credits roll. It's about doing everything you can to make the end as comfortable as possible, because even its happiest endings are tinted with sadness. And I realized the first time I played, I was playing it all wrong. I should have accepted those losses and moved on to fight another battle. I should have learned from my mistakes, and I should have faced up to the choices I've made. An island between life and death. A woman lost in the pain dealt to her by a cruel society. Does she have the power to save herself and see her love again? The Missing is probably this year's biggest surprise when it comes to video games. The game was directed by Swery, who's best known for the so bad it's good game Deadly Premonition. A Twin Peaks meets Resident Evil 4 knockoff with an interesting cast of characters, but poorly thought out LGBT representation. Like outright offensive takes on sexuality. So I'd say that The Missing is a testament to how much someone can change. The Missing begins with 2 college girls, JJ and Emily, going to an island for a weekend getaway to explore a relationship that's new to the both of them. Of course, things don't go as planned as Emily is chased away by some sort of monster, and JJ McField is on the case.
Sharks administered back major hemorrhage.
Why?
JJ McField is on the case. The central conceit of the game is that death doesn't exist on this island. In order to progress through the game, you have to hurt yourself, often grotesquely, in order to solve puzzles and move forward. As you make your way through the game, you gain more access to the messages on your phone. You learn about JJ's relationships with other people and the expectations they have of her, and her fear of what they'll do if she doesn't live up to their expectations. She is hurting herself so that she can navigate the world around her, either by giving herself more work or by being forced to hide who she is. Identity is central to this game. And while the mechanics are all about torturing your protagonist, it is handled with such care. It's hard to imagine that the same guy that came up with JJ as a character came up with this.
I won't let you have him! You filthy pig!
The game opens with this. This game was made with the belief that nobody is wrong for being what they are. It has compassion for the 2 main characters even as it puts them through hell. It believes in their love for each other and it believes in JJ, even if she doesn't. She's continuously carved into a society wants her to be and it hurts her, but she always comes back to who she is. But that can still be too much for her. This segment right here hurt me. It was hard to sit through. JJ gave up because she saw no other option. This is where the island took her. The news had been set before and she puts it on. What follows almost immediately is JJ McField realizing that she doesn't have to break down and rearrange herself for other people. I don't want to get much further into it and reveal everything this game has to offer. It's not full price. It's on everything. Play it.
ship replete with riches attracts more chaos than customers.
Okay, let's get this started.
I won't run away. Not again. Not ever. Every passing day, the winds might grow stronger. Joy to light the way to keep the reminder. Every passing day, the winds might grow stronger. I'm yours forever. There is no end in sight for us. Nothing
Must be
can
better than this.
the kind of strength inside our hearts, it's all connected. We're all together in this love, don't you forget it. We're all connected in this. I'm yours forever. There is no end in sight for us, nothing could measure. The kind of strength inside our hearts, it's all connected. We're all together in this love, don't you forget it. We're all connected in this love.
A hero struggles with the added responsibilities of adulthood. As you grow older, relationships strain, sometimes too far. Peter Parker's Spider-Man used to be my favorite superhero. I was introduced to him through three things: the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, a Spider-Man annual comic released in 2000, and Neversoft's Spider-Man game released in 2000. I loved Peter Parker. I loved his villains. I loved Mary Jane. I loved the movies, the games, the Ultimate comic books, Spider-Girl. But as I got older, the less I liked him. He died in Ultimate Spider-Man. The Raimi films ended with a mediocre entry and replaced by another mediocre series. The games got worse and worse after Spider-Man 2 with brief respites.
I'm going to die.
The mainstream comics decided to separate Mary Jane and Peter Parker by having them make a deal with the devil. Fucking cool. However, this game made me fall in love with the character all over again, something the MCU couldn't do. And I like Homecoming and love the Marvel Wars, but I'm over High School Peter as a concept. When Peter Parker was conceived, he was meant to be something we really hadn't seen before in comics. He was meant to have responsibilities and trauma and pain. He wasn't made to be aspirational, but relatable. He even aged from high school in the 60s to college in the 70s and 80s to adulthood and marriage in the 90s. But since then, comic book creators felt an intense nostalgia for the high school and college Peter Parker they used to love, so they wrote Peter Parker to be younger than he actually was. Peter Parker of the new millennium became an immature man-child. Just look at how Dan Slott writes him in the mainstream comics. The films have been doing this too. The Raimi trilogy focused on a college-age Spider-Man. The Amazing films put him between high school and college. And now the MCU has him in high school again. Marvel refuses to let Peter grow up despite the fact that there are other Spider people they can rely on to fulfill the teenager worried about prom, but also a Dr. Octopus storytelling. That's why I absolutely adore Insomniac's decision to go with an established Spider-Man and older Peter Parker for their game. He has a history, he's made mistakes, and new stories can be told. Like Peter's mentorship towards Miles Morales. Outside of the comics, you never see Peter take on a role beyond superhero. His whole deal is about power and responsibility, but he either lacks power or his responsibilities mean ditching prom to fight a Dr. Octopus. And look, PS4 Peter Parker still has to fight a Dr. Octopus, but now Ock is Pete's mentor, akin to Spider-Man 2, which further cements a parallel between Pete and Otto. Octavius shows arrogance throughout the game, but he had a kind heart. His goal was to help people with his inventions. He trusted Peter to double-check his work, unless Peter disagreed with Octavius' core thesis. Mary Jane split with Peter because he was unwilling to let her help him. However, the game does something smart and splits the POV between Peter, Miles, and Mary Jane. This story would not progress with Peter alone. MJ and Miles do their part to help Spider-Man and save the city with and without his blessing. Without Miles, without MJ, he and Aunt May would have burned to death. But Peter relents and actively works with the both of them. Octavius, on the other hand, alienates himself from Peter, only contacting him to brag about some new thing he's working on. Eventually, Octavius breaks things off with Peter to hang out with his new friends. Friends he merely sees as pawns. They aren't friends, actually. The Sinister Six don't work well together, and it's that very tension that allows Peter to beat them. But Peter trusts MJ. Spider-Man trusts Miles. Aunt May becomes dangerously ill, but he lays that responsibility in Miles' hands because he has something more important to do. When I said Spider-Man was about power and responsibility, that's what I meant. In Miles' grief, Peter gave Miles responsibility to try to help him through the loss of his father. In a moment where he feels the most helpless, Peter reminds Miles that he can help others, something Peter had to discover on his own. Miles felt close enough to Peter that, when he developed spider abilities, Peter was the first person he told. This is before learning that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Peter has more responsibility now. He's an adult and he has to pave the way forward for those coming after him. As a partner, an authority figure, a pillar of New York, he has great power and great responsibility. He is Spider-Man.